You are listening to Productivity Straight Talk with your host, Amber De La Garza. Amber is a sought-after productivity coach, trainer, speaker, and writer who gives entrepreneurs the straight talk on personal productivity. No BS, fluff, or overused jargon. Just actionable strategies to get results and succeed in business. And here is your host, Amber De La Garza, the Productivity Specialist.
Welcome, and thank you for listening to Productivity Straight Talk. Today is episode 248. Sprinkling more joy and fun into your workday with Mike Rucker. If you're a business owner who wants to learn effective business strategies, improve your time management, and elevate your productivity to maximize profits, reduce stress, and make time for what matters most, then you're in the right place, and I'm so glad you've joined me. I'm looking forward to this episode because, well, it's quite joyful and a bit fun and definitely lessons to be learned from our guest, Dr. Mike Rucker. Mike is an organizational psychologist, behavioral scientist, and charter member of the International Positive Psychology Association. He has been academically published in publications like the International Journal of Workplace Health Management. His ideas about fun and health have been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Fast Company, Forbes, Vox, Thrive Global, Mindful, Mind Body Green, and many more. He currently serves as a senior leader at Active Wellness and is the author of the upcoming book, The Fun Habit. And that is available January of 2023. However, you can go pre-order that book on Amazon right now. In today's conversation with Mike, we are going to cover strategies to find pleasure in your life, how Parkinson's law plays a part, ways to make mundane activities joy-filled through bundling, how to execute reframing and reap the benefits, the number one regret of entrepreneurs, and so much more. And now, let's meet our guest and get to the straight talk. Welcome to Productivity Straight Talk, Mike. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. How about yourself?
Good. I'm looking forward to this conversation. We did a pre-interview chat exploring what we could bring to our listeners. And I remember really early in that pre-chat, we were like, yes, this is going to be a great interview. So I'm really looking forward to this. And I hope you are too.
Definitely.
Yeah. So let's just start off with why am I talking to you about fun, the fun habit, fun in the workplace? Is this, tell us something we didn't learn in your official bio, but how did you get on this journey of this being your expertise?
Yeah. So without going too deep, my origin story is I've been studying positive psychology for some time. I'm a charter member of the International Positive Psych Association. And so it's been a discipline that, I've been a zealot of for a while. But in 2016, I had a trifecta of sort of unfortunate events happen. I lost my little brother suddenly. I was a long-time endurance athlete and found out I had advanced osteoarthritis quite suddenly, so that I wasn't going to be able to run again. And then my wife got an opportunity that moved us from California to North Carolina. And so we kind of uprooted from friends and family. And so that support system that had been there, for quite some time and made me happy was removed, during this time, where I also had to mourn my brother's death. And, my primary way of mitigating stress had been taken away. And so I had still really valued happiness and was overly concerned of how do I get myself back to happy?
Yeah.
And the more I chased happiness, the more elusive it became. And during that time, I was also finishing up my PhD, and that's only important that I had access to, PubMed and all these ways to look for research. And I'm kind of a geek anyways. And so I started investigating what is the deal here? It's sort of like trying to, catch a tiger by its tail. Right. And I found out that emerging research, I guess kind of serendipitously during that time, was finding that people that were overly concerned about their own happiness, over optimizing for happiness, were some of the most unhappy people. And so that was sort of the kernel of oh, there's something here, especially for PhD students, when you find a research gap, it becomes very interesting. And so I stumbled upon this new construct of fun instead of happiness. Like, and in its simplest terms, it's an action-oriented approach to finding joy and pleasure rather than being emotionally concerned about, chasing this thing that really is retrospective anyways, right? Like when we're thinking about happiness, it requires us to take pause and often takes us out of pleasurable experiences, right? Like, wait, am I happy? And like, instead of just doing the do and sort of living in the moment. And so it's, a subtle reframe that has to do less with emotion and more with like how we spend our time. But that subtle shift has all sorts of benefits. And so I've been fascinated by that construct. And that's why I'm here today.
Yes. Okay. I was not expecting that answer. That's a beautiful answer. And, as I'm listening to this, I'm sure a lot of people are listening like, okay, that makes so much sense. My son is 12 and I had a conversation with him pretty recently about happiness. And, so much of our life and the way that we spent our time was changed with the pandemic. And like you were saying, when you had that trifecta, right? Like every weekend was barbecues and birthday parties and hanging out with family and friends and extended. And that's just all he knew growing up. Like that's the lifestyle. And then that suddenly changed. And for a while, it was like you find your new norm. And one of the things that he had just mentioned was like, I feel like I would be happier if we were able to do the things we used to do before. Like he's literally articulating this, which is like everything you're saying is like he was asking for those experiences of fun and enjoyment, but also attaching it to how he's reflecting back, being like, and I think that's why I don't feel as happy perhaps, right?
Yeah, I think, for sure, the underpinning of a lot of what I believe comes from the self-determination theory. And components of that are that to feel like we're living a life full of fulfillment requires us to believe that we have autonomy, right? And so that was taken away from us, and for good reason, right? So I'm certainly not in a weird sort of red pill camp where that there aren't moments of life where you have this sense of duty that, we need to help the greater good. But that doesn't skirt the fact that we all also kept trying to lift each other up in a time where malaise and sort of melancholy was appropriate because we didn't have this agency and autonomy over what we want to do. But I think the big silver lining is a lot of people took pause and realized that what they habituated in their week wasn't really what they wanted to do, right? I mean,
yes.
Like the insight for your son was that's exactly what I want to do. And how do I get back to it? Right.
But exactly. And I think so that, yes. And so then the transition naturally is I'm now thinking like you probably of business owners where they've normalized working 6 days a week, 7 days a week, or to exhaustion. And they have edged out the joy, the fun.
That's right. And I think, especially, so this is only a subset of entrepreneurs, but what I saw, because in moments of crisis, one reaction to fight or flight is to work harder, right? Mm-hmm. Which can be normalized very episodically. Like, yes, we're under attack, so I've got to do it all. But some people haven't spun down yet, right? They still feel like, and especially, there are all of these sort of interesting world stressors that don't have an immediate effect on us, but we still carry, especially if you're empathic. And yet we're our best selves when we do take a little bit off the table. And so there's this sort of reckoning happening, right? One construct that I've been playing with quite a bit lately is there was this reckoning in the 90s of, entrepreneurial hustlers kind of celebrating not sleeping. And now no one would do that. Like even the folks that were some of the most interesting, like the Gary V's of the world, now say like, no, like, yes, hustle, but like make sure that they're bumper rails on your hustle. Right. And so I think pleasure and having fun and making sure that you're enjoying at least a certain amount of your hours in any given week is sort of the new sleep, right? Like we're still not championing it enough, but you would never, like if someone's like, yeah, and I'm only getting 5 hours of sleep a night, like even the folks, that are the most prescribed to hustle culture would be like, that's not smart. But yet we're not there with fun yet. We're like, people still have this really ingrained Puritan work ethic and think that if they're not sacrificing, then like somehow they're not living a dutiful life. And what's the most interesting, like that I'm trying to bring forth is, unfortunately, that means that you're not bringing your best self to not just who you are, but the folks around you. And paradoxically, you're probably not that productive. Like when we follow folks that are actually taking time off for leisure, it's a simple math equation, right? Like let's look at work as a unit of production, right? So if you're tired and burnt out but you're grinding it out, 58, 60 hours a week, let's say 50 hours. So, 1 times 50, you're producing 50 hours, right? Well, if you start to enjoy yourself and get less burned out, you might be twice as productive, right? So your units of production are 2. And so you only have to work 35 hours a week and still get set. And now you're getting 70 units of production. So you're more productive than the person working 50 hours a week. And you're also enjoying yourself a lot more. I mean, when you kind of peel it back and realize like, no, that is like the truth.
I agree with you 100% too. So I don't want to interrupt you, but I agree. So keep going because this is so
I think that's it. I mean, because there's so many folks that are like, yeah, but, and like, okay, well, especially smart entrepreneurs will believe the data. And it's like, okay, well then go look or do some self-experimentation, do a pre and post test. Like, at least give yourself 1 week of grace and see what it's like when you're actually, we call it the Goldilocks spot, like enjoying 2 to 5 hours each day, and see how much more productive you are. And I think like, that's such an easy sell, like, because as soon as you spend a week where you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm actually smiling. I'm actually enjoying what I'm doing. Life, the room starts to get a little bit brighter. And then you'll realize that's infectious. Like you stop, if you're a parent, you stop yelling at your kids as much as you were, because you have a little bit more resilience. And then that becomes an upward spiral where, there's air let into the room and the people around you want to hang out with you more. And it's like, it just gets really fun.
Yeah. I want to explore that a little bit more. So intellectually, we can know, we could experience it and enjoy it. Do you have any like opinion or research on the fact that the guilt stops you? So what I see behind the scenes with many of my clients is they'll say, it feels indulgent. It feels like I'm, not being a good steward of the work I have to do, or that my team is working. How could I take a Friday afternoon off? Like lots of self-imposed guilt or what it should look like. So do you have any opinion on like, how do you navigate through that to make this your new norm?
Yeah. And so what I suggest is story editing, which is just basically a psychological term for reframing. And that is what we just discussed, right? Like, so if you're living this dutiful life, and I'm sure, it's especially prevalent in the sandwich generation. I'm sure some of your clients fall in there where you're trying to, run a business, but you're also trying to help your kids and also probably trying to help your parents, right? So it is extremely stressful. But if you are not enjoying yourself, then you're not bringing your best self to those problems. And so I think that's the reframe. Like if you are one that is motivated by a sense of duty, then knowing that by sort of being miserable, in the activities that you engage in, if you're not finding them pleasurable, then most likely through, from neuroscience down to what we call mirror neurons, all the way to social contagion, all of that stuff bleeds into your relationships. So you're not just affecting your own mood and like, yeah, I wish I could. You're affecting the emotional state of all of your loved ones as well. Mm-hmm. So if you require that type of reframe, like you are doing it from the sense of duty, and that's, because some people inherently have that, and which is fine, then that subtle reframe of like, okay, well, it's your duty to at least, feel like you're living a life well lived, because that will also, bleed into your relationships and will help others be their best selves too. And so I find that subtle shift. Like, don't do it for yourself, then do it for the folks around you and for the sake of your business, because your employees will pick up on that too. I mean, there's leader, people mirror each other's behavior. It's that simple. I mean, that's psychology 101, right?
Yes. Okay. So I say something similar. So I'm going to say how I say it.
Sure.
So we agree that having more joy and fun lets you show up your best. I use that language, show up your best a lot as well. So if you can't do it for yourself, like you said, then you owe it to your business, your team member, and your family members, whatever matters to you, for you to show up your best.
Yeah.
And I frame that around like creating a schedule, a business, a life you love and you enjoy. But it's also like back to sleep. We did a whole episode on sleep a couple months back. And it was like, okay, that's one of the things that I believe people cut out because it feels like it's one of the only things we do solely for ourselves. So like when your parents need something, your kids need something, the school needs something, your team, your whatever, like fill in the blank, those hours can get etched away unless you hold them sacred and say, to show up my best, I need X, whatever that is for you, 7 hours, 8 hours of sleep. Well, I'm going to throw this in the bag of like, and you need fun and enjoyment and sleep so that you can be your best and grow this business and, lead your team and all the things we're talking about today.
Yeah. And so there's a few things to unpack there, right? So one, anyone that's finding this difficult, like show yourself some grace because these are things that build equity. So oftentimes they don't have that immediate reward. So that's why I would suggest like trying, for both sleep and fun, like give yourself a week or two and just feel it, because it's not gonna, like you try to do it for one day, it is gonna, you might feel guilty, like, and especially those tend to be interventions of escapism, right? Like, well, I'm just going to have fun this day. Like that's not really being mindful because you're not taking like a new approach to your work and your relationships. You might take a day off to golf or whatever it is for you, right? It's going to be, and like those episodic things will always feel guilty because they're a replacement. They're not like a new way of doing things, right? They're not necessarily changing your identity. They're just forms of escapism. And then the other is that, it does take time. And so these things build on each other, and we do these other things, like you might talk about it. In fact, I think, because I have listened to a few of your podcasts, like instead we'll just be busy because that will relieve the discomfort of us feeling like, well, at least I've got to do something. But being busy never really moves the needle, right? And again, so what I suggest is if you can do a time audit of how you're spending the 168 hours in your week, because oftentimes what you think is quote unquote work is actually you just being busy, which is work as a mirage, right? So you think like by, clearing 100 emails in your inbox, you're doing this dutiful work, but instead you're really just displacing that discomfort and you're not really getting anything done. You're just pushing the big rocks, to the next week. And that can really be a downward spiral. So there's those two aspects that, make it a little bit more difficult and where you do, need to get past that initial friction. And again, one is it's not something that's going to give you immediate benefit if you're not doing it mindfully. And two, again, there's sort of this comfort in being busy that isn't true work, or being productive for that matter, right?
That's right. Yeah. So like what I am thinking about is Parkinson's law. So tasks expand to the amount of time given. You use the word guardrails. If there's no guardrails to insert sleep, insert fun, balance, working out, that it just balloons, right? Like our work day or work week can just keep getting bigger and bigger because there's no guardrails to bring that in. And so is it true that when you're in it, it experiences, yes, there's more work, but it's actually Parkinson's law playing, and you can actually work and have Parkinson's law work for you and not against you. And that's by putting those guardrails in and filling it with the work that really matters. Like you said, like really act the rocks that move the needle forward, which, I would argue that if you're working on the right work, the work that has the biggest impact, that's fun for me. Like that might not be fun for everybody, but like that's a much more enjoyable outcome to me than the busy work and then pushing off the thing we know that has the biggest impact.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. I think, making big, heady tasks, Cal Newport calls it deep work, time bound, then you can turn it more into a game, right? Like, so of all places, this wisdom comes from John Cleese of Monty Python, but he talks about how, he was one of the most productive folks in that comedy troupe, right? And to some degree, it's because he would take these big tasks and he would turn them into a game where he allowed himself this free space because he really enjoyed that process. But if it's not capped, like here is the end, then it can eat you up, right? Because eventually you're going to start to hit diminishing returns. And once you hit that threshold, you'll start to beat yourself up because inherently, that you're not doing your best work, right? I mean, yes. at some point you're going to hit saturation. But for so many of us, especially if we're perfectionists, we'll grind it out. And that one, it's not productive because there is, you've already probably landed on your outcome. And then two, it's a monumental waste of time where like you could be doing something better and you're also really not enjoying yourself. So absolutely, I buy into that.
Okay. So when you are sharing about, sprinkling more joy and fun into the work week, we're talking about, yes, you want to enjoy, say, your weekends, but I think there's a saying, and I always mess sayings up, but it's like, don't work for the weekend, like have the work be the fun. Like you don't want to work 5 days because you're just looking forward to the weekend. Again, I totally bashed that. My point is that there was a time too where I'd be like, head down 5 days, like just get to Saturday. Can't wait for Saturday. And for some reason I would forget that there was like laundry and a house to clean and like groceries. And then I'm like, let me just get to the work week. Right. And then you get this vicious cycle. And for me, I was like, no, the joy is in the choices I'm making every day with how I wake up and my morning routine. And even for me, it was like, what type of clients do I want to work with? What type of work do I want to do? And those were where I found a little joy, but I'm just interested in like, how do you recommend, sprinkling in the fun, the joy into your work week?
Yeah. So there's a whole host of different strategies, right? And it really runs the spectrum. And I'll just name off a few. Like one strategy that I often suggest is called activity bundling, right? So if you're doing something that's sort of like in the neutral spot, how could you add a secondary activity to make it more fun? So that could be as simple as listening to music or changing the environment. So like if it's sort of a mindless task and you're finding that being in a specific, I'm in my home office. Sometimes if I want to make just answering emails more enjoyable, I'll go to a coffee shop near the local college because I like being around that vitality of younger people, right? And instantly that activity becomes more pleasurable. And it was just that simple choice. So none of this is profound, right? It's really just like realizing that you have a bit more mastery over your domain than accepting like, no, this just, like to your point, how so many of us do, like, this is just my fate, right? Like it's not.
Yeah.
And then others, can you replace the activity, right? So like, I'm sure that you talk about this with your audience, but, is there a VA where you realize like your time is worth this amount? But again, it goes back to that, busy sort of mindset, like, well, but I need to do it. Like, do you or can you buy some of your time back knowing that you can do work that you really enjoy? And oftentimes just exposing that, right? Like for us, it was as simple, you already brought it up, but it was simple as doing laundry. Like my wife's like, I don't want to pay. Do you realize how cheap Fluff and Fold is and like how much your time is worth on, and like all of a sudden it became an easy choice, right? Like,
I agree. So pre-pandemic, I also paid to have someone would come in and do my laundry, right? And our dry cleaner knows my husband and I by firsthand, like stuff that shouldn't go to the dry cleaner goes because I don't want to iron. And it sounds ridiculous, but I could spend Saturday morning ironing, or I could spend Saturday morning with my family out in the desert riding our UTV. Like for me, I'm always balancing, like I will not, the stuff still needs to get done. Is there a different way, to your point, that it can get done? And I can create more space and time for fun. And I wasn't there I wasn't there my whole life. Like this was a journey where I put a stake in the ground and I was like, this elusive carrot of like, when my business hits this revenue number, when I get this team member, when my business looks like this, I will then have a 3-day weekend every weekend, or I will work less hours, or I'll hire more people. And it was years ago, but there was a time where I put my stake in the ground. I was like, I'm not going to last this marathon of business ownership unless I prioritize like extreme balance of joy and like play and work hard too, because that's like ingrained in me. But I had to rewrite the stories. I had to edit it to say, even though I know how to do that and I'm really good at it, I actually don't enjoy it. And I don't think that's a question that we ask enough. You were alluding to that, or you said that, right? Like if you don't enjoy it, how do you outsource it?
Yeah.
Great strategy. But there's mindset work of like, am I worthy? Is that really a reason to outsource? Like, that doesn't seem like that would be a great idea. No, it's an amazing idea. And I think Mike and I are going to agree and champion for you. Maybe there's something you are amazing at that you hate doing. Good enough reason to outsource.
Absolutely.
Hey, do you feel like running your business is a constant struggle and you're sick of doing it all alone? It's time to get support. Go check out Amber's business coaching and training program, Leverage Lab. It's designed to help you take back control of your business and propel you to even greater success without having to sacrifice your personal life. If you want to increase profits, reduce stress, and run a business you actually love, go hit pause, click the link in the show notes to find out more, and grab your spot in Leverage Lab.
Another hang up, and it's one that I have as well, is I constantly check privilege, right? And so I think some of those things for folks where that is important, and I'm one of them, but this is just, like a privileged activity. For folks that are in, that bucket, like myself, it can be as simple as like, you know what, I'm just going to wear t-shirts, like, because I can, right? Like, why am I, you brought up ironing, like, or is there a wrinkle-free option, that will be good enough? Like, even just little, turning over the rock and and exposing things for what they are, just habitual behavior. Because, anyone that, is interested in behavior change at all, even at, just a rudimentary level, understands that things that have lasted for years and years, you brought it up, like these things that are just inherent in the way that we were raised, they're tough to uproot, right? And it can be something as simple as like, no, but I have to wear an iron collared shirt because that's the uniform. Like, is it? Because if you look around, God bless millennials and Gen Z, they're really, they're making things easier.
Yes. I love this idea of questioning everything, because we grow up, we just do. We grow up with like a lot of assumptions on what it looks like to, be a professional or live a certain way. I don't love grocery shopping. In fact, close to using the H word. Like, I just don't like it at all. Right. But, we have online ordering, and that's like common here. But then I talked to my aunt and she's like, oh, what are you doing? I was like, oh, picking up groceries. I ordered them. And I hear, well, that's nice. Or that's nice for you, or something like that. Right. And so to your point of like, are you willing to rewrite the stories? Even though it is privilege, you may feel privileged, and it might not be the same way you were raised, or your family, or even your friends. But are you willing to choose a different life for yourself, even though you're going to hear some of those comments? Must be nice, is what I heard.
No, but it's funny you say that, because for me, it was something as simple as getting a massage. Like, that is very pleasurable for me, and something that I'll often use, in habit bundling. So like, habit bundling is a shoot off of activity bundling, where we know through science that if you have sort of this carrot, it will help you get harder things done. Right. But long story short, my dad thinks that's just weird. Right. And I remember I brought it up, and he was like, oh, I forget what he said.
Something like, must be nice.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, oh yeah, that. And then I'm like, wait a second. This is like, no, it is so great. And it's such a great form for me of self-care that I don't care. And so it's really just getting over that hump. And then as soon as you do, the levee really breaks, I find. It might take 2 or 3 times, but by like the 4th time, it almost makes you laugh when you hear a comment like that. Like,
Yes.
Especially if it's internal dialogue. Like so many of us do it to ourselves, right? And then if I borrow this from Napoleon Hill, like it's an offshoot of in Think and Grow Rich. He talks about the strategy of, having this imaginary mastermind where like, you don't necessarily need to do it with other people. You could make up, I think he like talks about Benjamin Franklin and all these like interesting characters and so you can do like, have a voice of somebody that is supportive, right? And just like laugh at yourself, like, dude, what's your problem?
But that's the magic, is being able to laugh at yourself means you're observing the story and challenging, like, is it true?
Yeah, but sometimes not, don't make yourself schizophrenic, right? But like, if you can't do it yourself, like create a persona, and have that, create this person that's not, like, hey, you hear this often, in psychology, right? Like, would you do this to a friend? Like, negative self-talk and things like that. That same strategy can be used for challenging ideas, right? Like, be the voice of your best friend. Like, really
supportive, loving, encouraging, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I can't help but to share this story since we're talking about massages, because maybe that's the actionable somebody who's going to take from this episode. So I get a massage every 3 weeks. And I have a membership. It's like, I don't know, $80 a month. But I did it like literally like multiple reasons. One was money mindset. So for me, getting a massage in my head in the story was like, who are you to get a massage? Like, that is so but luxury and privileged. And I thought, is that true? And so I do it for money mindset, to be like, no, I normalize that part of my life. And so it actually represents me breaking the story that I shouldn't be doing it, right? 2, I wanted to make a stand for prioritizing self-care. And so part of that was also the mindset work of like enjoying it. So I would only go and rationalize it when I was in so much pain and I absolutely could like medically say I needed a massage. And I was like, okay, so we're not quite there. So what got me there personally was just taking a stance, being like, whether I need it or not, every 3 weeks, Friday night, I get a massage. And it's so crazy, the behavior, that the choice, we're talking about so much here. We're talking about like habits, behavior, all of it, but what that represents and how it unfolds in other areas of being like, and I take Friday afternoons off because I want to or because I need to. No, just because I want to, and it's fine. I don't have to justify why I take a Friday afternoon off anymore. It lets, like you said, every other decision be easier.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to, one of the things that we discussed at the beginning is that this stuff builds equity. So, at the end of the day, if you're only doing it when you're broken, you are going to lose a lot more time. So again, if I imagine that a lot of people value time, if they're listening to your podcast because it's about productivity, right? These things allow you to do more stuff, because if you're not fixing these things until they're broken, you're going to spend a lot of time, in negative valence, and unpleasurable states, rather than, again, building a little bit of health equity or whatever it is, psychological equity, so that you have the resilience to deal with the bumps and the bruises as they come along. And then you just move on and you're a lot happier doing it. We've landed on the same place. Again, you just got to get over that initial friction. But once you start doing it, and I know we've talked about self-experimentation, just again, give yourself a week. Like, if it seems hard, just try it, and almost every time without fail, you will realize really quickly the folly that comes with not, pulling a little bit off the table for yourself. Yes. Every entrepreneur I've ever, or most of the entrepreneurs I've spoken with, at their biggest regret on both a monetary standpoint and a lifestyle standpoint is when they haven't prioritized taking just some off. Right? Because so many of us feel like we're living for others whether that's like some elusive dream or the goalpost is always going to move, or, they're empathic and they think that that if they fail, then, everyone else associated with the business and their own family are going to fail with them. And both of those are fallacies, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to give like some real life examples of like even my clients. So I have one client that gardens on Monday mornings, like not at work at 9 a.m., gardens, and it's blocked out on the schedule. I have another client that takes a dance class on Wednesday mornings and totally breaks the I should be in the office, whatever, fill in the blank of your own story, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and decided that they were going to carve out block of time. And to your point, experimented with it. Like, okay, did those 2 hours that I put a stake in the ground and prioritized me and joy and whatever that looks like, did it actually have you miss every deadline, not get the important work done, drop your revenue? And I'm going to tell you the answer is no to all that. Like it doesn't, but in our heads, we make decisions as if all that's true. It's going to totally kill the business.
Well, and I know we stayed at the top layer, but those two examples that you just shared are amazing, because one of the benefits of a creative outlet like gardening or dancing is as we get to be adults, we develop these things called heuristics, and they're basically like structures, because as adults, we got all of this incoming information thrown at us, right? And so it's not our fault. It's like we need to create these internal algorithms, these heuristics, so that we can deal with the chaos that is life, right? But what happens as a result of that is we lose the ability to be creative and to think non-linearly. So when you find entrepreneurs engaging in this type of activity, one, it's fun, right? Because you get to choose it, again, flexing that autonomy, but it allows you to regain access to that, part of our intellect. And so you'll hear time and time, I'm sure you hear it from your clients, generally after, engaging in that type of activity, some of the biggest insights will come, because it's one of the best ways to connect, to coalesce ideas that weren't necessarily meant to fit in a linear fashion. So you'll these profound business solutions that are like, oh, wow, I would have never gotten there, if it required, A to B type thinking, but you figure like A to Z is a way better way of doing it. Like, let's try it.
Yes.
Right? And when you're in the thick of it, when you're just grinding stuff out and you're just, doing stuff, because you want to survive, you're kind of stuck in that fight or flight, right? Because things are hectic. It's really hard to come by those creative solutions. So that's another benefit of,
Well, you said that so well. Okay. So then I'm going to throw one more in there. And I stumbled upon this myself, but I would go for walks. Like, let me back up. So one of my strategies is that we want to block out thinking time or decision time. So as a business owner, it's one of the most important things we got to do, but we hardly ever see it as something that's on our schedule to create that space and time for, right? So once I got that and I was like, okay, so we need to create the time and space for it, I would go on walks and just set the intention. Like, okay, so if I, launched a new offering, what would that look like? Right. And for me, it wasn't pressured. It wasn't like, oh, you have to have an answer, but you know how your mind just wanders and meanders. So I would just put like guardrails around what it was going to meander around, why I walked and moved my body. They are and were so impactful when I created that space and time. So moving my body helps, creating a little bit of guardrail, but a lot of grace and freedom. Like it didn't need to have a specific outcome. And doing it during the workday that I would have been at my desk. And I tell you, I will not get to the answer with these two screens up. Like even if my emails shut off and stuff, like this is like a work environment and that's not the same type of work. So I need to change the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a whole host of science to back you up on that one. So,
well, I stumbled into it. I don't have the science. So give us a few of the science nuggets, because some people are listening that are like, okay, sounds great, Amber, but like the science is going to nail it for them.
No, I mean, we get stuck in those modes, right? So a change of scenery allows us to sort of get out of what our brain thinks needs to get done within that space. And so, environmental tweaks, if you feel stuck, are great, right? And again, it's another reason if you do find like in the evening, you're not able to switch roles. I mean, this is a bit of a tangent, but it still applies to, the narrative that we're on. Like having some sort of ritual where you do switch. Like I am not in like bang it out tactical work mode, whether, it can be as simple for me. When I was working outside of the house was, I would switch my ball cap I would take the bill from the front to the back. And that was like, now I'm here for the kids and I'm not in work mode. Right.
Yeah.
And so again, these seem like really low level interventions, but science backs up that they allow our brain to go, okay, so I'm not in this particular role, because every role that we have has a set of instructions, right, to keep us going. And so when you can change those instructions, again, in your example where it's like, okay, well, I'm not at my desk anymore, so I don't need desk rules. It allows you to be much more free thinking. Sometimes it's the opposite, right? When we need to grind stuff out, you might want to get off your bed and like, again, I use this episodically, but then get back at your desk and you'll find that like, okay, now I can just, bang this stuff out.
Yeah.
So both apply, but,
okay.
yeah.
So that was a great example, by the way. So I feel like we could talk forever. You were like ping-ponging back and forth. I'm just going to give one tip out to anyone that's listening here. One of the things that I have experienced with clients that robs them of joy is taking work home. So when you were talking about that transition, right? So it's the briefcase, the laptop, the intention of like, oh, I didn't get those two things done. After dinner and the kids go to bed, I'm going to work on it. And inevitably it does not. You're tired, you're exhausted. Maybe you had a glass of wine. The kids you got distracted with the kids, you name it. But what happens is you weren't fully present in your personal time. You had this monkey on your back of the thing you said you would do. Then there's this guilt and this inevitable, you're starting the next day 100% feeling behind because you didn't honor that you said you wanted to do it, but you didn't really want to do it. Literally, I just described robbing all joy of your personal life. Yep. So here's my advice. Don't bring the work home. It wasn't going to get done anyways. Literally give yourself the gift of being present, baseball cap backwards with the kids, have your dinner. If you're tired, no guilt about being tired. Go to bed early. And maybe that's like an entry point into having those guardrails and like prioritizing you and just keep the guardrails of like work is during work.
Yeah. And then I don't know if you guys touched about it on your, the science episode. I missed that one, but like that was one of the biggest things from sleep science that they corrected, again, when that became a hot topic. And they found that when people would bring their work into the bedroom, they were training their brain that was the workspace. So, for sleep psychologists, that's one of the first things they do is ask if you're working in bed, because there's only two things that should happen in bed, right? They both start with S. And so, and work is not one of them. And again, they found like, our brains do a lot of things in the background that if we're not paying attention, can trip us up. And so, people that are like, bring their work, and work until they go to sleep. There are some of the folks that have some of the, worst problems with sleep. They call it sleep hygiene because that, again, we've trained ourselves that this is an environment not for sleep per se, but where we're going to, deal with the last crisis of the day, which is awful, right? So like just kind of putting an exclamation point on your idea, like, it's not just at the end of the day, but if you're then kind of mortgaging it to the end, the evening and bringing it to the bedroom, that's where things can go terribly wrong. So just kind of a last piece of advice on that. Yeah.
And to your point, right? Like it may solve that immediate crisis issue, check the task off. So they're getting that emotional, like high, the dopamine hit, but it's a long-term gain, meaning if they don't do it, they're not going to see the benefit that night. Not maybe even that next day. It's going to take changing this behavior over long term to get the benefit. But that's where it catches you up. You have to have the long-term mindset of like, what does this look like 2 months, 3 months, 6 months from now? And can you hold off on that feel good in that moment? Because it's not going to feel great long term.
Yeah. So one of the tools for that too, for people that feel like, well, but then I wouldn't be able to go to sleep, especially if you have a predisposition to anxiety, is just write it down, right? Like obviously you also don't want to be on your phone either, right? So kind of the second tier of sleep hygiene is to make sure you're not getting blue light, right? And wearing blue light glasses is like, come on now, like, let's just not have screens in the bedroom, right? But if you need to sort of wind down, like if you're having these thoughts ruminating about work or whatever, a helpful strategy is like, just get them on paper. But I think an additional point there that's really tough, and it goes back to, showing grace for ourselves and others that you brought up at the beginning of the episode, is that with knowledge work, our to-do lists are never going to be done, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's another thing that we sort of have to accept. And once you do that, things do get easier, right? Because then you can deliberate with your own task list, knowing like, okay, I have to be comfortable with some of these things just not getting done. And that's going to be okay. Life's going to go on and I'm still going to be successful. So figuring out in your productivity system how to integrate, how you're kind of closing out the day. And I'm sure, everyone has their own routine. I'm a big believer in planning my week out on, Sunday evenings. But whatever that means, like, get it out of your head. So it's not sitting there, and know that it will be okay. It's still sitting there for you in the morning, and you're not going to forget it because it's written, been written down.
So one of the keystone productivity strategies that I teach is the daily RAP, RAP, review and action plan. So it's a download, you're corralling all the information that came in, and then you're updating tomorrow's plan. So it's like a course correction. But to your point, it's a great way of like just putting a pin in it. And getting all the things that are circling around in your head out, digitally, for many of us are digital or written, whatever, but it's the practice of getting it all out of your head into one place, prioritizing, setting the stage for tomorrow so that you can transition and say, and now this is personal time, family time, self-time, whatever that looks like for you. I believe creates a lot of peace and also joy. You can be more joyful and present when you don't have all the things rattling around in your head.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's a better palette, right? It's a better space.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So first of all, we, like all my interviews, we have this like piece that we're going to talk about, and I just let the conversation go. And I got to tell you, this has been an amazing conversation for me and I think for our listeners. And I got to say, I love that like you are talking about the fun habit, you're talking about more joy, but you didn't come here saying, by the way, you probably wouldn't have gotten the interview, but you weren't like more parties in the workplace, more like that's great that there is that piece, but you really came with it of like, how do you integrate this? How do you make it support your productivity? What does this look like in real life? And, finding the joy in the moments and being purposeful about it is, I feel like if I summed up the conversation we had today, and I think that's going to be very, very valuable for all of us that got to hear what you had to say to us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we transition here though, you have a book coming out, right? The Fun Habit.
Yeah.
Why don't you share a little bit about the book and what we could expect if we go to, I assume Amazon, like where do we go to get it? Share with us a little bit more about the work that you do.
Oh, I appreciate that opportunity. Thank you. Yeah, the book was supposed to come out next month, but unfortunately, due to the global supply chain issues, mass-produced books have all gotten pushed. So it's available for pre-order right now wherever you buy books, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, whatever. And I'd be grateful for that type of support. It's called The Fun Habit. It's going to drop in January of 2023. And then I coalesce and talk about the science of fun, all the stuff we've talked about on this episode at my website, michaelrucker.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
That's right. It has been. I've been smiling ear to ear the whole time. So definitely fun. I have loved having you listen to this episode of Productivity Straight Talk. And I sure hope you found my conversation with Mike to be incredibly valuable. But I need to be straight with you. No change, no change. Without taking action, nothing will change for you or your business. So How are you going to sprinkle more joy and fun into your workday? This is an actionable that I think we can all get excited about. I really believe that we all want to enjoy the work we do. We spend and invest so much of our time into our business, and our work days fill so much of our waking hours that I want it to be the most joyful it can be. So what strategies or insights did you hear from my conversation with Mike today that inspire you to take action to find more joy and fun? And I can't wait to hear more about what those actionables would be. You can share that with me by following me on Instagram. And if you do not already follow me, it's Amber_De La Garza. And if you do, DM me or comment on this week's episode posting inside Instagram and let me know what was the insight, the aha, the thing that you are going to take action on to create more joy and fun in your workday. I can't wait to hear from you. And if you've been listening to Productivity Straight Talk and wonder what it would be like to work with me, I invite you to check out my business coaching, training, and accountability program, Leverage Lab. See if it's a fit for you. See if it offers the support, the training, and the accountability that you need and or want to take your business to the next level. I would love for the opportunity to work with you. So head on over to amberdelagarza.com/leverage lab. So that's my straight talk for today. Until next time, have a productive week.